This show is made possible by our Patreon supporters. To get access to our exclusive content and support the show, visit www.patreon.com/EABB podcast. That's www.patreon.com/EABB podcast. Thanks.
Hello, and welcome to the Early American Brass Band Podcast. I'm Chris Triano, joined always by Stephen Canistrisi.
Hello.
This is episode 48, and today we are joined by Dr. Joel Crawford. Joel is the owner of Joel Crawford Recording. He's a recording, mixing, and mastering engineer over there, and he's also a former musician with Saxton's Cornet Band. It was really awesome to get to hear Dr. Crawford's perspective on early American brass bands now that he's removed from it for a few years and has his new career and some retrospective insight into the music that I think is really awesome and a nice change of pace and something that I'm really excited to share with all of you.
Yeah, definitely. We think it's a great episode, a good perspective of it from a different angle. So that's always great to get to hear. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, as always, you can support us on all social media platforms. You can follow us there. That way, you're kept up to date with everything that we are putting out. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we put out not only the full episodes of each show, but smaller, tidbits that we release on YouTube, videos, movie clips, other things like that. You can visit our website. That's eabbpodcast.com. A wealth of information up there that we've put up. And if you want to get in touch with us, I think that's the only thing left for me to say that I usually say at the end, but I'll say it here. Yeah. You can email us. Our email address is eabb.podcast@gmail.com. So I think we'll leave it there. I won't say anything else.
Geez, Stephen, take up the whole episode. Why don't you?
I know. Long intro, but here it is. Here's the episode.
Thank you so much to Dr. Joel Crawford for joining us today on the Early American Brass Band Podcast. Joel, thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for having me, guys. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah, thanks for sitting down with us. Maybe we can get this one started and rewind a few years, or maybe more than a few years. When did you begin playing with Saxtons, and how did you kind of get in with them?
I knew a bunch of the guys from playing in the Lexington Brass Band. I started playing in that group when I started my DMA at the University of Kentucky, and was interested in the brass band activity. I've long been a history buff on the kind of amateur end of it, just is a long time interest. And the idea of period music is one that really spoke to me, and the Civil War in general, something I've been interested in since I was pretty young. And, going to the reenactments as a kid, I always thought was the most fascinating thing. And so I was able to get involved with them and start learning that music and playing those instruments, and had a really great experience with them.
Nice. So that was the British brass band experience, kind of your first brass band experience, or?
Yeah, everything prior to that had been more of the brass ensemble, more modern, trumpets, with kind of the orchestra wind section expanded, like works of Strauss and things like that. So working with Dr. Holtz was my first real experience with the British style and playing the brass band type cornet and instruments of that nature. Mm-hmm. So, and that was a great learning experience as well, both musically, as well as the literature. Working with Dr. Holtz, who is a very well-known scholar on the British band history, one of the best out there, and he's retired now, but I'm sure is still quite active.
I know that there's a lot of listeners of the show that are interested in this history and the bands as well. but they're not necessarily either familiar with the early brass bands in their area, or there are no early brass bands in their immediate area. I know you said you kind of got involved with Saxons through that British brass band. Do you have any advice to maybe some of those listeners who are interested in getting involved more with playing that aren't quite sure how?
Get on the internet and just search. A lot of the bands have a web presence now. There are quite a few. When I started my research on the performance practice aspect of the Civil War band, one of the first things I did is let's see who else is doing this and what they have to say, and just Googled just to kind of as my first shot. And there were tons of bands that came up, and there were a lot of people that really, really loved this music, and the activity of trying to put together something historic and this part of our, our cultural heritage. And there are a lot of bands out there that, range from, the professional end to the more community and enthusiast types playing historical music. And there are lots of opportunities out there. And it's something that I hope, that keeps growing as part of our community music making. We can do more than just play the Sousa marches in our community band. We can look to our history and find these instruments and play this music.
Was the early brass band scene, the Civil War brass band topic, I guess I should say, something that you were interested in researching and doing your dissertation on when you started your doctorate degree, or is that something that kind of came up either maybe organically or all of a sudden while you're already in the middle of the degree?
It's something that kind of came up because prior to that, and now still on the other side of that, my primary focus has been on contemporary music. I went to two schools, my undergrad and master's at Iowa and Bowling Green, which are both known for their new music programs, where I was heavily involved with new compositions. And now my work now as a classical recording engineer is primarily working with ensembles and record labels, promoting new music, contemporary composers, living composers. So I've kind of always had that what's new, what's going forward. But while at the same time being someone who really loves history. And the first time I had that horn in my hand and really starting to learn that and learn from the guys in the Saxons, it kind of just like, I want to explore this. And that kind of happened pretty early in the degree, that I decided that I really need to learn about this historically and see how far I can take it and dig into that rabbit hole.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your current recording engineer career?
Sure. I mean, I'm a classical recording specialist. Work all around the country. Work with a lot of, big ensembles and anything from colleges to professionals. And recording is something I've been interested in for a long time, and kind of got into it as a student. And then as a doctoral student, ended up working with Dave Henderson, who's also a member of Saxons and a classical recording engineer. And I found out pretty soon that people called me a lot more for that than playing the trumpet, and kind of took the hint a little bit. And just for my own workflow, just to kind of be on that side of the production element, just works better for me. But it hasn't reduced my passion for the music and the research and the history of this music. Because, kind of what I thought in the degree program was, maybe I'll get a job teaching somewhere and then I can teach music of the Civil War as a side part on that. But that's not quite where my life led. But I like to help promote it as much as I can, because there's certainly a lot of really valuable research happening out there. And I think that the activity is gaining more and more steam and getting more attention. And I certainly see it a lot more now than I did, 15 years ago when I first started dealing with this stuff. Though I don't think it was just because I hadn't done it before and now I'm seeing it everywhere because I've done it. I think that that there really has been an increase in the interest and people doing the research and kind of getting this more and more out there.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, did your performing and all your experiences in school, like does that inform the recording you do now and your approach to recording ensembles when you're out working with them? Your performance experience in the past?
Absolutely. Most of the more of the top tier of us doing the classical recording are trained musicians. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of necessary to be able to approach a lot of like the classical music and understand, be able to sit down with a score and conceptualize how you're going to transfer that sound into the recorded medium. So it's still in a way very much being part of the performance. How do we take the performance and maintain it and deliver it to a different audience? And I mean, score study is one of the really big parts of classical recording, really understanding all the nuance in a score. Especially that's why I love new music, because if someone says you're going to record Mahler 2 tomorrow, I'll be like, okay, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I don't need to look at the score to know what that's going to need and require. But when I'm working with something new, it really, you have to take it apart and look at it. And what is this texturally going to be? What is the sound going to be? And even though the historical band thing is something old, not something new, I think it's that similar kind of approach to it that really drew me to it. Because like in my dissertation, I talk about how we don't have treatises of American Civil War band. You can't go and say, what is this ornament supposed to be? Let me pull up the Haydn, violin treatise, and we'll see what that says. We don't have one of those. So we have to kind of take everything apart and be like, let's put this puzzle together of how this would have sounded. What would it have taken to get to that? To get to this sound of what this band would have actually sounded like. And I think that's very much similar in a way to working with contemporary music, where it's something we're hearing for the first time, because we are hearing this music for the first time in 150 years. And mm-hmm. How do we make that first time kind of match?
I'm curious, in the recording work you do now, is it usually pieces that are being recorded for the first time, or, first or second time, or are these, newer works, but still there are some recordings of them out there?
It's a bit of everything. Right now I have half a dozen projects across the board, and 2 that we're doing albums we're recording this year with the CCM Wind Symphony. One is based on classics. We're just recorded Lincolnshire Posy. And then on our next recording session, we're recording a brand new work for pianist Michael Shertock and the Wind Symphony that was, I believe, was commissioned for him. Not 100% sure, but I believe so. This will be the very first performance, very first recording. So doing a little bit of both, stuff that's old, stuff that's new. I really like recording something that's never been played before, the premiere, because then I get my artistic kind of stamp on it of part of how I think this piece should sound. Like Lincolnshire Posy, we all know how Lincolnshire Posy should sound, right? We've all got that CD or cassette tape of Frederick Fennell, the Eastman Wind Ensemble, and it's hard to beat that, but with something new, we can give it a little bit more of our own artistic stamp to it.
Yeah. So are you working with Kevin Holtzman?
Yes, I am. And he is brilliant and one of my favorite people to work with. And this kind of music is something I'd love to see him get his fingers on a little bit. I know that David Goins has put a lot of work into creating arrangements of a lot of this music for the modern wind ensemble, to try to convey some of that sound as much as we can, and the kind of the character and the stylistic elements of it into more the modern wind band, so we can make it a little bit more part of our modern repertoire of the wind band, since our more historic ensembles are obviously spread much more thinly throughout the country.
Yeah.
So
when Kevin was doing his DMA, I was finishing up my undergrad. And so I played under him a few times while he was working with the wind symphony, the wind ensemble. Super nice guy. Really happy to see him having a lot of success and doing the things he's doing. So if he ever hears this, that he's doing a good job. Not that he needs me to tell him that he's doing a good job.
He's doing big things are coming, through CCM and what he's doing, and getting to watch it up close with doing a lot of their recording has been a real pleasure. And I think, for the band world, there's going to be, some big things eventually. Mm-hmm. So I hope anyway.
When you were with Saxton's, did you have any experience or opportunities to record or do any of this audio tech stuff with Saxton's, or when you were with them, was it purely as a cornetist?
We did recording, but Dave Henderson is the one who does their recording. And so I played on a number of those recordings and assisted him a little bit. But although the Saxton's recordings are done by Dave, and he does a really very nice job with, I think, capturing that sound.
So with either your experience assisting or kind of being able to take a step back and visualize and conceptualize what a recording project like that would entail, what are some challenges from the other side of the music stand, the technical side, that our listeners might not be aware of that might be a challenge when recording these types of bands?
The biggest problem with a group like that is finding a space that projects the sound forward to a position where you can record it. When you have the upright instruments, the forward-facing instruments, in Saxton's, we use one over-the-shoulder baritone just because it's the best instrument that we have. So it's kind of like a horn. You have to have a reflector up to kind of punch it forward. But other than that, it's kind of a SATB, like a like consort setup, basically. It would be a relatively straightforward recording. I'd probably record it with just a pair of Omnis in a good sounding space and try to capture that homogeneous sound and get as much of the blend. That's one of the characteristics of the sound of that type of group that really, as someone who's an audio guru, that I really enjoy is just the tonal texture and blend of the cornet band type ensemble that is so unique. It's so much different than when you hear a modern brass ensemble, and it's a really special sound. And I think that's one where it really has to be the blended single voice of the ensemble rather than, hearing, 15 different voices.
From somewhere that might have the vocabulary to be able to describe this better than I have in the past, what would you say is that tonal difference between a band like this and like a modern band? Like, I know it's kind of a it when you hear it kind of thing, but I know a lot of people talk about mellowness, warmth, the sound that the conical instruments produce. Do you have thoughts on like specific maybe descriptors of what those differences are?
Well, compared to like a modern British band.
Yeah, let's go with that. Yeah.
A modern British band still has a great deal of brilliance in the sound. They'll talk about the warmth and the fullness. And a lot of times you're talking about warmth and fullness, you're talking about mid-range balance, your middle and low voices being very full and round. But you listen to a modern British band and those cornets and the E-flat cornets, you're still getting a very brilliant top end. Where it's a very projected group. You go hear one of like the top tier competition groups, like in France and England, and the first thing they do is blow your hair all the way back. It's like, I've never heard something so loud in my life the first time I heard one of those groups. It's just overwhelming, the brass power, and that power is a big part of that kind of ensemble sound and the allure of it. It's a lot of fun. It's like hearing drum corps. You hear that great drum corps. I'm a big DCI fan, and that just the power of it and the raw energy. And it's very different in a cornet band because it's not loud, it's not in your face. And when it's at its most, kind of to the fore, it's more like a string quartet almost, where it's never really brassy and bright and really biting. I mean, you get some brassiness out of the E flats, of course, but it's there's always that homogeneous sound to it that's really kind of full and focused unto itself, rather than as a kind of blazing wall of horns. There's just this kind of surge of energy from a more central, I think, singular voice is kind of the way I hear it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then maybe putting our educator hats on, what do you think the benefit is for a musician to have that experience playing in an ensemble like that if they're playing in powerhouse orchestras and wind bands and maybe British brass bands? Why is it nice to be able to have the experience of the more homogeneous sound and the mellowness and the warmth?
I mean, just the delicacy that you need to learn to play in an ensemble like that, and the ear training is so critical. I know my ear got so much better playing in Saxtons. It got better than than years of study, and a year of playing with Saxtons. You really listen so closely so that every voice really, really balances and is right in its right place, and really listening to your neighbor. How is my tone enveloping in each other? What are we doing as a team? Now, those are obviously things you do in any brass ensemble, but I think the touch is so light with a cornet band in most instances. There are certainly, like, you're going to play light cavalry or something like that, you're going to just let it rip. But especially with the majority of the music being dance music, there's just this light touch, this delicacy, this more string quartet type approach. I think, at least that's the way that I've kind of always viewed it. Really homogeneous sound.
Yeah, definitely. And we've gotten this far into the conversation without specifically mentioning intonation, so that's great. Maybe we don't have to talk about intonation. We can pretend that it's always perfect and be okay with that.
Well, I mean, that's part of the ear training, and
Yeah.
Because like Saxons plays extremely well in tune. It's in tune in a lot of other professional groups that I play in or played in. I haven't played in a couple of years now, but it's just a lot of work that goes into that, and a lot of listening and a lot of learning to play the instrument where it wants to be played. Really, that's where you can get that pitch to settle. You see a lot of guys approaching this for the first time, and they're really fighting that pitch. You get up there, the 450, 460 pitch, and you just kind of have to adjust your ear to hear that that's where that pitch is. I'm not just pushing in and playing sharp. That's my center, and we're going to sit there in that center. And it just takes time and practice and a lot of listening.
Just came right from our rehearsal at George Mason University with our early brass band there, and I was having us do exercises. We were just doing unison scales up and down because we kept on finding that for certain pitches, conveniently enough, a lot of it was concert E flat, and on that concert E flat, everybody was always muscling it down to where they either hear it at 440 or what they have to do in their concert horns. But it would be like a mostly half okay scale up and down, and then when you land back on E flat, it'd be wildly out of tune because everybody's like pulling down and doing all kinds of crazy things. So yeah, definitely hear you on needing to play centered and not giving into what you think your body wants to do. You gotta lay into the ear and the instrument itself a little bit more, for sure.
Yeah, with these instruments, it is about submitting to the instrument. It's a very different instrument than what we're used to playing now. And obviously we've trained, for a lot of us that's getting into this now, for decades of how to play a modern brass instrument. And these things are just totally in the opposite direction. They're going to play with much more resistance. You're going to have to play much focused, much lighter touch on everything. You can't go into it thinking that this B flat cornet I'm playing is going to play like my Yamaha or Bach or whatever you've got now, that because I play a extra large bore Yamaha brass band cornet, which is like blowing down a hallway, and
Yeah.
and it makes a nice big round sound, and I like that. But these instruments from this period are going to be much more compact, much more focused, and you can't put that strength of airstream into it. You have to play the airstream where the instrument wants it to be and to where it plays centered. I know with the band, when we often had guests play with us, someone we needed a sub, and we'd have professors from local universities that are these amazing musicians play, and the first thing they do is overblow the snot out of it.
Yeah.
And they just sit there overblowing it all night long until we're like, dude, just relax. You gotta sit way back on these instruments and let the instrument tell you when it's had enough. And kind of the more modern approach to brass playing is, we're gonna play the instrument where we want to play it. And with the historical instrument, we need to back way off and be like, where was this instrument meant to be played? And obviously we haven't been trained on that because there's very little teaching that goes on an instrument like that. But just learn from the instrument.
If Stephen and I wanted to play our Wilson euphoniums where they want to be played, we'd never be able to play in tune in the key of F, because Wilson euphonium Fs are like 20 cents sharp and the A's are like 15 cents flat. Yeah, that instrument's a little crazy with where it wants to play, but once you muscle it and force it to do what you want to do, they sound great.
Yeah, and I've been playing that particular horn for a long time, and I still haven't figured out how to do it. So.
When we were talking about how you would record one of these early brass bands in the space and all those things, I was reminded of the image of Fred Fennell and how he recorded the Eastman Wind Ensemble's recording, with how he conducted the over-the-shoulder brasses so that they could see him, and then the woodwinds were facing out into the hall with car rear view mirrors attached to their stand so they could see Fennell conducting behind him. Sounds like you would pick a space where the room works better for you, kind of thing.
Well, it kind of all depends because of how an instrument is designed to be heard. And you do need to orient musicians in a way that the proper sound is getting to the microphones. With Saxtons, with using Dave Henderson plays the over-the-shoulder baritone, at least when I was in the band, that's what he was playing. Mm-hmm. If you turn him around and face him right into the microphone, then that's not getting the characteristic sound of the instrument either, because it should be more of an upright bell than a back-facing bell. But if it's a front-facing bell, then that's quite a different sound for a concert ensemble. Now, obviously, for a marching ensemble with all over the shoulders, if everyone's kind of bright and blowing in the same direction, that's fine. But with the Saxons, the goal is always with, concert level musicianship, and what is the best possible example that we can make with the instruments we have of what would be say you heard the Port Royal Band, what is our best example, and how can we best convey that in a concert setting to a modern concert audience and what they expect.
Yeah. And that brings up really interesting points, because especially with instruments like tuba, euphonium, and horn, you can maybe, say that their sounds are intended to be heard reflected off of surfaces, right? And they're meant to fill up spaces, as opposed to trombone or trumpet that are maybe more directional sounds. But then if you're talking about over-the-shoulder instruments, they were all intended, right, to be directional, right? Because they were in front of the soldiers, pointing directly back at them, and outside. Sure. There's no reflective surfaces outside. So it's kind of an interesting thing to think about, that over-the-shoulder instruments are all directional, I guess, kind of like marching band instruments, if you want to think about it like that. except they're all facing forward, like souzas and contras and marching baritones and mellophones and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a bad, I hadn't actually thought of that, and that's kind of a good analogy. Some of those instruments, the few that I've had a chance to play, I haven't gotten to play many of the over the shoulders, just because it's not what Saxton's had available to us. I think they had an over the shoulder set at one time, but that was prior to when I was in the ensemble. We only have like the more concert type instruments, but the times that I got to play them, my impression was that they sounded brighter. And that could have been just the example that I played. It's so I can't say definitively on that.
Yeah, it's not something that I really thought of either until you were just talking about it.
And it does remind me of the British brass band so-called recording setup that some bands I've seen play in outside, is where they'll set themselves up so all the bell upright instruments are facing out. And it's a different sound. It is, a mid-aggressive, low-aggressive sound when the tubas, the baritones, and the altos are all basically bell out to the audience.
So I guess that would be if they're sitting in a box formation to the conductor, it'd be on the conductor's left, I guess, looking at them so that the bells are angled out that way. Yeah. Wow, interesting.
Yeah, I've seen a band play like that once. It was a band from London that was at the Great American Brass Band Festival. I think they were from London, somewhere in the UK. And it was quite a different sound with all the bells facing out.
Does it make it sound more American in any way?
I mean, it was more brassy. It wasn't quite as round as that you think of. And they played a program that was more on the aggressive up-tempo side. Okay. So that may have influenced it as well. And that was about 6 or 8 years ago now. I just still, reminded of that. So it made an impression.
Wow, very interesting. I'll try to find some YouTube recordings of those kinds of setups. That'd be really interesting to hear.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear that. It was always funny when like a conductor would mess with the setup of like the concert band or the wind ensemble, and move the trumpets up a row or something. And I forget where it was, but like the conductor went through a period of a couple of weeks where he changed the setup every single rehearsal because he was like trying to figure out what kind of sound he wanted out of the group. But essentially, we used to do that with a tuba quartet I played in, where we had 3 euphoniums and 1 tuba. So unless you set up in like a check mark kind of thing with all 3 euphoniums on one side and the tuba on the other side, you'd always have one person at least with their bell facing the back. You could do some cool things. Then I think in a master class, someone had us like all the euphoniums stand behind and put the tuba player like in front. That way everyone's bell was pointing off to the side, but they were all in the same direction.
Yeah, I did it that way once too. Wasn't a huge fan of that setup, but yeah, I did a concert like that once.
You need a rear view mirror on the stand for the tuba player so you can see the people behind him.
Exactly.
So your dissertation title, Performance Practice of Brass Band Music of the American Civil War, a perspective from Saxton's cornet band. Can you kind of give maybe the 5,000 foot kind of overview and maybe how you arrived at this as a topic for your labor of love, shall we call it?
Well, my degree is in trumpet performance and pedagogy. So the project needed to, my early drafts of the project were very historical. And the professors are like, you got to remember what you're actually studying here, Let's talk about the performance. And so I kind of took a turn to talk more about, I think my overarching goal was to have a document that folks like you, people that are educated musicians that might be interested in approaching an ensemble like this, say you're a graduate student and you want to try to put together an ensemble of Civil War period performance, Here's something to get you started. It'll give you the basics and the overview of what this music is about from a performance musician's perspective. And so that was kind of the goal, was a document as a starter, a conversation piece to help inform trained musicians. So this is not meant to be kind of like the Dodsworth, which is the real basic, this is how to make a sound on the instrument. Mm-hmm. We're already talking to already trained musicians, so we can talk in a little bit more detail about articulation style, breath support, things like that. How do we take the modern and approach it to the historical in a way that we can get to what we believe approximates what this would have sounded like.
Mm-hmm. So how did you go about, for this research, finding that information and being able to put it into words? Was it all hands-on experience with just Saxtons, or did you kind of go out and survey other bands, or what was that process like for you?
Well, a lot of it is based on my experience with the band myself, talking to all the members in the band, any musicians. I kind of put out a call as far as I could reach to anyone involved in this activity that wished to participate. Talked to a number of faculty that had an interest in this at other schools. Don Johnson was really big help on this project, he's sadly passed now, but he was a huge advocate of historic music, both in the natural trumpet was kind of his thing, the Baroque, but he was also very big into keyed instruments and the sax horns and instruments like that. So I spoke to as many enthusiasts, hobbyists, professionals, anyone that had a thought on this type of music, because so much of it comes down to our experience with it. What do we believe? What can we infer from the resources we have? What seems to be the right way to go about it? Because we do have some answers, like we can look at what would have been the tempos. Well, what is the tempo of a waltz or a schottische or a reel? We can look at historical documents for those type of things to kind of get our tempos. But then what would the sound have been like? What would the instrument have sounded like? What would have the way you play the instrument been like? And, especially like the opera transcriptions, would they have been like someone going out and playing it how it would have sounded in an opera hall? Probably not. It would have been, a little more up tempo, a little bit more exciting, like think of the song from the movie kind of thing, except for opera in this case, because that was popular at the time. So I really put together as many different sources as I could. Be there the music itself. I have stacks and stacks of letters and newspaper articles and any type of description of the music that I could find. Though that was often not very helpful, I found. When I started out that process of let's look for descriptors of this music. Almost everything you find says it's the most amazing performance they've ever heard. And it was rousing and upbeat and moving and lots of very, ornamental, flowery language, with very little of actual detail on the music making. So, and there's very little to almost nothing written academically about the music from the period. Yeah. There weren't music professors somewhere writing, well, we experienced this brass band concert, let's break it down. A lot of it really comes down to inferring what we can from the sources that we have, because it's not super well documented of what it would have 100% sounded like.
Something, I don't remember if this comment made it into a previous episode or not, I might have cut it out, but something that I found interesting, looking at old tintypes, different images, seeing people of the time, seeing the occasional one of them doing something like silly or whatever, or reading journal entries of them, being people and being human, you're really able to see that these people in a lot of ways were very similar to how we are today. You know, still goofballs, a lot of them still having fun. And then in like the Dodworth Brass Band School, there's the line that says something to the effect of, play the music, you know, one of the rules, play the music as it's written. Don't embellish it on your own. If you want to play something fancier than what's written, then stand up and do a solo, like pick a solo piece. Don't mess with the arrangement, kind of thing. So like to me, that shows that, you know, just like in middle school band, people are like noodling like on the song, like making up their own stuff and having fun with it. And you know, there was the military aspect of it where I'm sure a lot of things were much straighter, but you know, the community band element of it, you know, these guys were just honking away on plumbing like we are today. And if people have the urge to switch octaves and play, you know, pedal tones every once in a while, and got to assume that it was happening back then too, which is kind of in some ways a comforting thought for some reason.
Yeah, and you know, speaking of just you know, the way we kind of are now, one of the things that kind of struck me with so many of the different like soldiers journal entries that mention the music, there's so much pride in it. This was their regimental band, you know, and they loved it, and it brought them closer to home. You know, this or that music reminded me of being here or there, and there was a real love for it. And just as we have, you know, a love and appreciation and, you know, the fan culture to our modern day artists, you know, there was a real love and appreciation amongst the fighting folks and all the people in the communities that their community bands. And that's probably why there's so much of the flowery language about it is, you know, these were staples in the regiment, in the community, and these people love their music and they love the experience of the music making. And even if it may not have been the greatest, you know, they had this very positive experience with it, which I think is maybe one of the bright sides of such a horrible conflict, is that there was this culture that still somehow poked through.
In a community band scene?
I did. I'm originally from Iowa, and my dad is he's retired now. Was a high school band director for 42 years, and nice. I played in 2 different community bands when I was a kid, and one that was directed by my middle school band director, who I believe is going on 45 or 46 years now, and been leading that band for a long time. One of the oldest bands, the Timber City Band, one of the oldest bands in Iowa, continuously performing bands. And when I was in college, I played in a professional park band. We'd play several services a week. We had one of those Wenger semi-trucks that opened up into a bandstand. And nice. So the band tradition is something that's always been near and dear to me. So
do you think it was having that community band tie growing up that kind of got you into the historical band interest a little bit later in life? Or
it very well may have, because I mean, that's what led me to the Lexington Brass Band, which is a community group. Even though it has a lot of college and professor type members, it's still very much a community-based, community-supported ensemble, which is wonderful. And there's always been that desire to be involved in music making. I'm a little sad that I don't get to do it now. I can't. I don't have time to practice or go to rehearsals. But I still love to go and support it as much as I can. And as what I love to see, you know, people just supporting people making music.
Definitely. Your dissertation is readily available online, so I appreciate you doing that, whatever, $70 fee. That's what I had to pay, the $70 fee to make it free online. Heads up, Steven, save up for that if you want to read it for free. So we'll be able to include it, you know, in our show notes, and we'll link to it and everything for this episode. But I'm wondering, with your doctoral research, we already talked a little bit about some of the processes you took and stuff. Is there one nugget of information or revelation or information that you included in the dissertation that you're either particularly proud of, or something that you think is particularly unique to your document that you're proud of?
That's a tough one. There have been so many people that have been doing this type of work and just doing so much really wonderful work and research in this area that I don't know that my document is any particularly special in any reason, but with it, I just hope that my kind of target audience of what I would hope to get from it is someone who hasn't heard this music before, who might be looking into it, just looking for something different that might be involved in history, might pick it up and say, I want to give this a shot. Help this music live on. And I hope my document can give enough of a basis of knowledge that someone can read it and then say, okay, I've got an idea. I think I know I have the tools to start this. Mm-hmm. It's not going to give you the be all end all of how to play in a historical brass band, but my goal is to say, I hope that this can be enough that someone can walk in and be like, okay, I've got an idea. Let's get this going. Let's get this rolling. I'd certainly love to see more programs doing like what you're doing. Was it George Mason?
Yep.
With teaching this to students.
Yeah,
there's a lot of emphasis on, I'm seeing more and more historical performance stuff coming up. I know at the University of Kentucky now, Jason Dowell is very big with the natural trumpet, the Baroque trumpet, and he has an amazing program for the Baroque trumpet. And I think understanding our musical culture is something that is very important to understanding our future. Where we came from, where does this music come from? When you play Baroque music on a piccolo trumpet, it's very different from when you play it on the natural trumpet as intended. And, that informs our modern performance. And I think music of this period, our Civil War period, even though this was a short, rather brief thing, because the cornet band wasn't really around for that long. It was kind of a shift through. The sax horns arrived in the 1850s. They were getting more popular around the late 1850s, and they threw some cornets in there. But then by the time we came out of the Civil War, we were heading into the wind band movement. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of this gets a little bit overlooked because of its lack of longevity. But it's still an important part of the development of the American School of Brass Playing. And so I think studying that and bringing this, more to it, both the community and academic side of it, we get to hear something that's unique. It's part of our culture and our American history, and is part of our, academic history of where our brass playing came from.
Yeah, definitely, I agree for sure.
I feel like if nothing else, too, like all of that aside, very, very valid reasons to teach it and everything. I mean, it's even just playing this music on a modern horn flexes your ears, like we were saying before, and your overall musical sensitivity, and being able to be agile and listen and react and respond in the moment to your colleagues in the ensemble. And then I don't think I've actually played a period instrument yet. Now that I'm saying this, yeah, I know Chris is looking behind him, pointing at all the ones in his apartment.
It's a baritone right there. You could play that one.
That I could literally walk 200 yards and play. But but I feel those skills are probably even more developed when you play on the period horns too. So yeah, I think there's a lot of value in this, even though like you were saying, it's kind of a rather condensed period of time where this stuff was really active and popular. But again, I feel like I'm the king of right turns here, Chris, unless you had a question to ask. I wanted to ask something about what I see and then hear quickly read in your dissertation.
Go for it.
Um, you talk briefly about wax cylinder recordings, and I remember, and you cite the, what is it, UC Santa Barbara library has, digitized a number of wax cylinder recordings, and I've stumbled across this a few years ago, and I thought they were the coolest thing ever. Those wax cylinder recordings, because it's like a snapshot of, however long they were able to capture on just a hollow cylinder of wax with a diaphragm and a needle and a big recording horn. I just think it's so crazy that they were able to do that. Did you get lost listening through those when you found them?
Yeah, I listened to tons of them.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time trying to, I called a number of museums, looking online for different um, databases of these things. And I think it was Don Johnson that turned me onto those. He's like, oh, you haven't seen Santa Barbara yet? Go check it out. You'll get lost on the rabbit hole. And there's so many cool things there that it's this peek at history. And it's sad that none of the tinfoil ones, which are earlier, I would have thought that maybe someone would have digitized them in some way, and they may be. I just wasn't able to discover any of that as it related to this topic that existed. But I would have think that you would be able to digitally scan that somehow, because I know they can't be played. But I guess that's probably a follow-up thing to look into. I didn't.
There's your second dissertation.
What is some of the material that they had on wax cylinder that you listened to?
I don't remember offhand. That was quite a few years ago.
Was it wind band music? Was it early jazz? Was it
there was a lot of early band, salon band, some brass band type stuff, but they were small, not a regimental type band. Quite a few I listened to a lot of the early wind band stuff in informing some of this, just because it was probably about as close as we could get to the style, being that they were playing a lot of the similar material, the marches and dances, because the early jazz wasn't, happening at the time with the Civil War groups.
Yeah, there's a lot of in that UC Santa Barbara wax cylinder library archive. There's a lot of the like Edison band. They're in there a ton. There's some Sousa stuff in there too, which is kind of cool to hear.
The Edison band would have just been the recording company's like house band, Edison's recording company for the cylinders, and I think they had an orchestra version of it too, but it was usually just like a house group kind of thing for it.
Yeah. There's a cool video too of I think it's like the Edison Museum. There's an Edison Museum, right? I think so.
Yeah, gotta be one somewhere, right?
Hopefully. Yeah. Now that I've said it out loud. But I know there's definitely a YouTube video of like either a museum employee or somebody like demonstrating how a wax cylinder recording was made. I remember it being outdoors. I can remember the video very well, and I'll link it in the show notes. But it's a cool little I think like 10 or 12-minute demo of them actually doing a recording on a wax cylinder, which is really neat to see.
Seeing a diagram of like the original Dixieland Jazz Band doing wax cylinder recordings, and they would like have them lined up vertically, right? So like if somebody was like taking a solo, they'd go to the front of the line to play into the horn, and if they wanted something more subdued, they'd be further away from it, but they were more like in like a straight line playing into it.
Technology has come a long way. So.
Yeah, definitely. The last question that I have, and we can maybe debrief after this and see how we're feeling, but the last question I have is probably one that you got from your committee at the very end too. What sort of follow-up research do you think that either somebody else could take directly from your research, or maybe something as a second dissertation, something follow-up that you would want to do? Where do you think this particular line of research goes from here?
Well, and I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I think is really taking this kind of to the next level is what Dave Goins is doing with taking the original manuscripts and adapting them for the wind band and trying to do it in a way that maintains what we would hear of a balance. So it doesn't sound just like here's a wind band playing a schottisch. This is a wind band written in a way that will get you the flavor of what this music was. So we're taking this music and maintaining it in whatever way we can and getting it out there. And it's with, I believe what he's doing with the performing editions also is including history type materials with it, with the intention of educating students about this period and the music and the culture surrounding the conflict. And obviously not getting into the actual war itself, but the music and how the music and the field music, how it functioned. And so I think that that's probably kind of the next place to it, is how can we work these ideas into our education system at large? How can we promote this music and get it more into the consciousness of those who are educators? So this may be kind of a basis for, say, informed students to that maybe want to start their own ensemble. But where we go from there is how do we take the next step? How do we build more ensembles? How do we take the music and these manuscripts and interpret them in a way that are more accessible? Because most of the manuscripts are just notes scribbled on a page. Almost none of them have tempos. They don't have much of anything in the way of dynamic markings. It was just understood conventions of the time. Oh, this is a quick step. We're going to play it how a quick step goes. Well, how does a quick step go? So Dave's really doing some great work with that. And I think that is probably the next best step, is performing editions of the music that are informed through research. Really getting its music out there.
And a lot of that historical context stuff is kind of being done by the Marine Band right now with their Sousa project. I know with each Sousa march that they release to the public, it's at least a full page, more than just program notes, pretty substantial history that they put at the very beginning of each of those editions. So,
I would love to see if so much of this music would be so well suited to music education. A lot of these quick steps, especially, so there are so many quick steps in these books, and they're all, short little 2/4, moderately up tempo pieces, and a lot of them are easily playable by probably middle school on up age kids. And so there's just a treasure trove of our own musical culture that's right here at our fingertips, and we should be making it. And the more we make that music available and the more it gets into the public consciousness, the more it would hopefully create a demand for people playing on the extant instruments, the real thing. Let's go and see and touch these instruments. Here's some history. Our kids played this piece on their last band concert. Now let's hear the professionals do it, or the community group do it. And just building awareness, I would hope.
Yeah. We need more concert bands playing Fireman Polka, right?
Hey, that is such a great piece. I love it.
It's a good one.
That's we played that. One of the performances that I did is probably the most memorable with the band was when we split a concert with the Cleveland Pops at Severance Hall. Wow. And playing in a great hall with a great audience. And the acoustic in that hall is so good that it's really made the instruments sound about as good as they can. Really, really highlight that richness. And that Fireman's Polka, gets people to their feet, and it's a lot of fun. And I think it highlights what this music should be about. It's uplifting, it's rousing, it's a lot of fun. You go and you enjoy this musical performance and you become involved in the performance.
Joel, this has been great. It's been great to get to know you here a little bit and chat with you about your experiences and your research and everything. So we're really thankful for your time tonight. Where can people go if they want to find out, more about you, more about what you do, and some of the recordings that you're making?
Well, I have my website. It's joelcrawfordrecording.com. It's not up to date all the time, but it has some of the newer projects and links to where you can hear some things for free. And most of the big projects I do are on Spotify and Amazon Music that you can hear for free.
All right, Joel. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome.
This really makes me want to, get out and listen. I'm gonna have to go to hear a Saxton's concert the next one time they're around me, so I can hear that sound again. I miss it, and need to get out and support some of our local groups around here. I think there's a couple here in the Southwest Ohio area, and
you got some in Ohio, you got some in Illinois. There's a few groups up there. So we have a document on our website that has all the current brass bands in the area. So feel free to go over there and email whoever we linked on in that document.
I just want to thank you guys. I appreciate the opportunity to revisit some of this, and it's kind of made me realize I need to get back into doing some of this, and so hopefully I can do that at some point. So
yeah,
maybe find a way to record some Civil War bands. So
yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's it right there. Thank you again to Dr. Joel Crawford for coming onto the Early American Brass Band podcast. Awesome to get to hear diving into his dissertation research and also his experience as a recording engineer and his time with Saxton. So thank you, Dr. Crawford, for coming on the show.
Yeah, and I won't waste time here by saying the whole spiel that I did in the intro. But if you listen to the intro, you can support us on all social media platforms. Visit our website, eabbpodcast.com, for show notes for this episode, where we'll have links to things we mentioned, and also links to where you can hear some of the stuff that Joel has recorded. And speaking of that, we have a featured album for this episode, and we are going to turn it back over to Joel.
Well, it's not Civil War, it's Gershwin, but
sweet.
Recent album that came out in October with the CCM Wind Symphony under Kevin Holzman, and featuring pianist Michael Shertock, works Gershwin and Adams. Is a pretty cool album and some really great playing, and there's going to be a couple more albums with some band classics that are going to be really cool coming out. So encourage everyone to go out and support their local wind bands, and whether they're community bands, college bands, get out there, listen to some band, especially the brass bands. And I really think what these two guys right here are doing is really amazing, really taking something that is a love of mine and really taking the research to the next level. And I think that that's really fantastic.
Music for this episode was provided by the 8th Green Machine Regiment Band from George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, and the Saxton's Cornet Band.
And my dog.